On the eve of the day that the Dáil is set to defy for the first time the thronged phalanx of bishops and pro-lifers on the abortion issue, we host the final debate between the competing sides. With us are Cora Sherlock, Deputy Chairperson of the Pro-Life Campaign and the Solicitor, John Halligan, an independent TD for Waterford. He has criticised the Pro-Life Campaign for the harassment of TDs and has criticised the Catholic Church hierarchy for taking part in the debate, saying that they are in no position to lecture us on moral issues. Also with us is William Binchy, who's legal advisor to the Pro-Life Campaign, and he's Professor Emeritus of Law at Trinity College Dublin, and joint author of the textbook on the law of torts, the latest edition of which will be launched next week. And Peadar is a consultant child psychiatrist at the HSE and a member of the Doctors for Choice Ireland. If you'd like to come to the programme, you can text us at 53131 and place the word tonight before a comment, or send us a tweet at #B or email us at tonight@tv3.ie. William Andy Kenny has said repeatedly throughout the weeks of debate on this abortion issue that the abortion legislation changes absolutely nothing. It is merely codifying the law as set down by the Supreme Court. Isn't he right?
He's right and he's wrong. He's right in a trivial and misleading way, but he's profoundly wrong. And I think it's fair to say he knows he's wrong in suggesting that this does not change things. Of course he's correct in saying that the Supreme Court, in the X case 21 years ago, in a decision where the Supreme Court interpreted the pro-life amendment, that this legislation implements that X decision. He's quite correct in saying that. Yeah. But he's quite wrong in suggesting that this will not have huge, profound cultural changes and actual changes in Irish hospitals. Quite wrong. Because what is involved here in these circumstances is that the law will require hospitals, including hospitals whose ethos and culture and whose human rights value system says that they shouldn't take innocent human life, that hospitals will be obliged in the future to take innocent human life in circumstances where there is no medical necessity, indeed in circumstances which can be envisaged by the legislation where there was not even a psychiatric mental condition involved. So the suggestion that there is no change here is unquestionably, in Mr. Kenny's mind, I think one is perfectly entitled to say he knows that that's an entire falsehood.
I think that's really unfair, and anyway, you don't know whether he knows or not.
No, I have to speculate that.
Yes, but you said it as a fact.
I said it on the basis of the actualities.
Okay, but you don't know what is in
no,
his
I don't
mind,
know I don't know the inner recesses of Enda Kenny's mind, but I do know that what came out of his mouth before the election was an assurance to the Irish people that if you voted for Fine Gael, you would be voting in circumstances for a party that would not legislate for abortion. That's what we do know. And what he is now doing is to legislate for abortion. And frankly, Vincent, if we stay in the world of reality rather than the world of PR and make-believe, which the government have been peddling for the last 6 months, the reality is that the proposal here is that we should have, as I say, Irish hospitals, contrary to their ethos, contrary to human rights, should introduce a legal regime involving the termination of innocent human beings' lives.
Following the Supreme Court decision.
Absolutely not.
The Supreme Court decision in the S case said that abortion is permissible here in certain circumstances where there's a risk to the life of the mother, including the risk of suicide.
21 years ago.
And that, yes, it doesn't matter, 81 years ago, it makes a difference. Yeah. Any time since 1937, it makes no difference.
No, but Vincent, you used a word which is quite wrong also, but in your case, I think innocently wrong, right? You said it's quite inevitable. There's nothing inevitable in these circumstances that we should, as a political...
But again, you were making an assumption about what I was going to say, which isn't accurate. That arising from the X case, there has been a legal entitlement for women who choose to have an abortion in certain circumstances to have an abortion. That's the import of the X case.
Yes, absolutely.
And that for them to have an abortion, they have to have it somewhere and some medical facility that would provide it for them. So it was necessary, it would have been necessary if all hospitals refused to permit that, there would be, I think, a resort to the courts to force them, or force a particular hospital to provide an abortion.
Okay. May I unravel what you've said there, okay? Because you're presenting this as if this is something that constrains the government, that the only way forward for the government tomorrow is to introduce legislation consistent with the X decision, the Supreme Court decision. That is, unfortunately, the fallacy of the assumption. The Supreme Court, the Oireachtas, has absolutely no obligation to implement the X decision. What the Oireachtas has an obligation to do under the European Court decision of 2 years ago is to introduce clarity into our law. Now, it can do that in a number of ways. It can do it in the short term, medium and longer term, but it is not constrained or obliged to implement the X decision, because what the X decision involves, sadly, and Cora I think will support me on this, the X decision is bad medicine, bad law and extremely bad human rights.
Well, you may argue that it has no obligation to implement, to legislate for the X case. You might argue that, but others would argue differently, as would the members of the Supreme Court back in 1992 have argued differently now McCarthy. But if let's suppose there was no legal requirement to legislate for the X case, the fact would remain that abortion would have to be provided in certain circumstances here without there being any regulation of it at all.
No, I think, again, Vincent, I'm sorry to be a little bit persistent, but it's absolutely at the core of this issue, because I think very definitely the Minister for Health, to a lesser extent Mr. Kenny, though he has been speaking in one-line mantras rather than engaging in the debate, I think it's fair to say, over recent months, but they have put forward the argument that you've been putting forward there. Sorry, Irish nation, we have to introduce this particular measure. Our hands are tied. Their hands are not tied. The Irish people, may I point out to you, are the bosses, if you like, of the Irish Constitution. It is they, not the Supreme Court, who actually determine policy in this area. And the idea that a Supreme Court judgment based on no medical evidence 21 years ago, in circumstances where we now have the scientific and medical evidence relating to suicidal ideation, that at this point the government is constrained to introduce legislation rather than taking a variety of other strategies, that is frankly disingenuous.
John.
Well, first of all, it's very poor legislation. If you consider this very carefully, if you look at what's required for a woman to have an abortion on a case of suicide, it requires a doctor, 2 or 3 doctors, specialists. Are you seriously saying that in the year 2013 that a traumatised woman who feels, first of all, that she might be suicidal will go through more trauma of having to go before this board of specialists? She will not. She will go to England. And if I could just reply here very carefully, we have 4,800 women leaving the state every year for abortions in England. We have to get real on this. There are traumatised women that have been raped and violated. There are traumatised women who are carrying a fetus that is not compatible with life, fatal fetal abnormalities. We say to these women, have your abortion, but have it in England. This is obscene. This is not right, and it's not fair. I can only speak as I have spoken to women. I've spoken to a woman that was violated and raped, and under no circumstances would she have been able to go through 9 months of carrying the pregnancy. She would not have been able to do it. And we're not in a position, any of us, to decide what's suicidal and what's not suicidal. Specialists all over the world, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, are not in a position to say when somebody is suicidal and when they're not. And if you look at it, we'll take certification for involuntary detention under the Mental Health Act. Requires 1 doctor and 1 specialist. We're asking a woman to go to a doctor, an obstetrician, and 2 psychiatrists. There is no woman going to do that. They're going to go to England. We have to face up to reality in this.
If they can afford it.
I'm sorry?
They're going to go to England if they can afford it, and they're going to go to England if their health permits them to go to England.
No, but I think a lot of it has to do with compassion and the trauma that a woman might be going through.
Cora.
Yeah, I mean, Vincent, I think this bill should really be called the Destruction of Unborn Human Life and the Betrayal of Women Bill, because at least if it was called that, we'd be having a bill which did exactly what it says on the tin. As it is, that the government has deceived the Irish people, it is continuing to deceive them, and it has really had a very dishonest campaign to introduce abortion. Now, I think some of the things that John has said...
Give us an example of the deception apart from the title of the bill.
Apart from the title of the bill, well, let's look at why we're having this brought forward tomorrow. I think the important thing for TDs, Fine Gael TDs in particular, who maybe haven't made up their mind which way they're going to vote, they need to really look at who's happy about this bill coming in between the coalition parties. Because it can't be both things. James Riley has been telling us for months now that this is going to be the most restrictive regime of abortion legislation that there is.
It doesn't matter who's happy.
But let me just finish. He's said that it's going to be very restrictive. On the other hand, we've got the Labour Party who've been campaigning to have abortion introduced in the country for 20 years. Now, what we have at the moment is Labour Party TDs very happy about this. Rory Quinn said last week in the Dáil that this bill will for the first time allow a woman to have the right to choose. Anne Ferris has said that she will be popping a bottle of champagne when the bill is enacted.
If Rory
Ciara Conway,
say that, he's legally mistaken.
No, he's not legally mistaken. He's just being honest. He's one of the few people who is being honest in this debate because he knows that this is the liberal abortion bill that the Labour Party has wanted, and the Fine Gael party has completely given in to Labour on this issue, and they've broken the pro-life commitment which they gave to the pro-life campaign and which they insisted on giving before the last election.
It doesn't permit women to choose abortion except in the most exceptional circumstances.
That's not the case, Vincent. This bill has no time limits. It allows abortion for the full 9 months of pregnancy. And that is the regime that Fine Gael TDs are being asked to vote on tomorrow.
Again, I wonder about that because it makes the point, the bill, or certainly an amendment that's accepted by the government, makes the point that there is a requirement to do everything possible to protect or save the life of the child.
But Vincent,
and that quite clearly after 24 weeks, if somebody wants to have an abortion, that can effectively take place by saving the life, in many cases, by saving the life of the child.
Why is there no advocate in this bill for the unborn child?
I don't know, but that's a separate point. We'll just deal with the point I just made now.
No, but it's not a separate point because that is really the point. The Minister for Health is not explaining these parts of the bill. He's not explaining the fact.
But you accept that there is a requirement in the bill that every effort should be made to protect the life of the child, to save the life of the child.
No, I don't accept that because this bill is the liberal abortion bill which the Labour Party has been trying to introduce for 20 years, and at the moment we're having a situation where we have a...
Can I speak on this? Can I actually come in there, if you don't mind, when you've spoken? I do think a lot depends on the amendments. It's funny how the democratic process has been a little forgotten in the media in the last week. It's like as if Lucinda Creighton and, anti-choice concerns about the bill are really the only news, whereas there are a whole list of amendments, two of which in particular would deal with the concerns that we had about Savita Halappanavar and women who might find themselves in the same situation. What we have with this bill is a bill that will introduce abortion in a very uncertain light. It will depend very much on the fear that a doctor has of being criminalised, and it will depend very much on whether that doctor has anti-choice views or pro-choice views as to whether a woman can access an abortion. And this is not what the European Court recommended when it asked for accessible and effective procedures so that women could be sure when they were eligible for an abortion. I do think it's worth looking at two of those amendments. Amendment 83, which would allow for abortion in inevitable miscarriage, which would deal with Savita's case, or in cases Amendment 84 in cases of rape, which the majority of the Irish public support, in the case of a risk to health, which again the majority of the Irish population support, and if she believes it to be in her best interests. That would have saved the life of Savita Halappanavar. And this is the big question. The world is watching Ireland on this. And I think we have a big question to answer. How did we let a woman die in those circumstances last October?
But the bill that will go through the Dáil tomorrow night won't deal with that.
Well, yes, but I do think that before it does, it would be a good idea if people got to debate not just the anti-choice amendments.
Deal with the point that Cora made, that this is introducing the liberal abortion regime in Ireland, which the Labour Party wanted to do for ages.
No, I mean, I think John's point is what every doctor in Ireland is saying. Dr. Anthony McCarthy, the president of the College of Psychiatrists, made this point, I think it was this morning, when he talked about that this will not alter the practice, that 5,000 plus women leave Ireland's shores. I mean, we had the Irish solution to an Irish problem for contraception. We now have the British solution to an Irish problem for abortion. It's shameful. It will continue to be the case that there is abortion in Ireland. It just happens in Britain and Holland and Spain, and we've got
And
to
in
take
Northern Ireland.
And in Northern Ireland, and we've got to take responsibility for
Derry
it.
and have an abortion.
And this is just an
circumstances
irresponsible
not
debate
permitted here.
about angels dancing
But I
on the
think,
head
Vincent,
of a
just
pin.
very brief if I can.
Well, I just said William in again.
Okay, of course, yeah, okay.
Peadar did say a number of points. He advocates, and from his own perspective entirely logically, for a right to choose position, which means abortion on demand, which is the derogatory way of saying a right to choose.
Yes.
Because
effectively,
yes.
William, can you imagine anybody,
Yes.
any woman in the world
Yes.
going in anywhere and demanding an abortion?
Well, I put it this way.
Requesting an abortion and saying they'd like to have an abortion, but demanding abortion.
Well, William did say it's a derogatory way of saying I like to choose. He's right.
Allow me to say the point. We can, you know, we're not going to convince each other around this table by using slogans, right? Right to
But
choose.
that's a slogan.
Okay,
demanding.
it is.
Yeah,
But the
right.
truth of the matter
That's a
is
slogan.
that Peadar said something.
And a misleading one.
Peadar said something which is quite interesting and revealing, and not in any sense attributing anything bad to you. But you did say, Peadar, that what will actually happen in the future now, if this legislation gets through, which it looks as if it's going to get through, it will depend on who is making the decision. And you did say, I think it's correct to say that a pro-choice person will be likely to be more disposed to say yes than an anti-choice.
Depending on the fear of criminalisation, which is the other factor.
May I make the other point, which is picking up on your...
And anti-choice doctors may sit on panels and be inquisitors of women who are looking to see if they're eligible for an abortion under the new bill. And that's a fact.
And the pro-choice,
it's a fact, and we might as well talk about
the
it.
pro-choice people will be, as it were, exercising their pro-choice values. That's the kind of apprehension.
And it shouldn't be that uncertain.
I
It
know,
shouldn't be down
I know.
to that.
Regardless of the uncertainty point, the point is that pro-choice doctors will be exercising judgment, as you said yourself, in a manner that will be different from those
and
who are
in keeping with the reality of the UK.
Okay, can I get onto the substantive point? Could I just answer this
John,
one?
just let William
Okay,
finish
just
his
this one, because it's a point that's been bouncing around for the last 3 months, and I would like to try and nail it down, and Cora did nail it down. Of course, during pregnancy, if a medical condition arises that is life-threatening for the mother, doctors at all stages have done and will continue to do what is necessary in those circumstances to provide appropriate treatment for mothers, even if this means that it results in the death of the unborn child. But in the case of suicidal ideation, we're talking about something different. And then we're back to the X case again. The X case said that in a case of suicidal ideation, you can terminate the life of the child in circumstances where this is the only way of dealing with the suicidal ideation. Yeah. Now, there are some cases of suicidal ideation where the argument will be put forward, the assertion will be made and believed by psychiatrists that in what the woman's complaint is, not that the child is inside her, that is a location, a geographical location, but rather that the very existence of the child is the basis on which she will take her own life. Now, in those circumstances, taking the child out of her body and having, as the Minister for Health said, an induced delivery at an early stage on the cusp of viability, that won't solve that person's problem because the suicidal ideation will continue. And under the X case principles, in those circumstances, the X case principles being implemented in this legislation, the termination of the child's life is appropriate. And that little clause about we'll do our best to keep the child alive, unfortunately, doesn't trump, in those circumstances, the right to terminate the child's life, because that's what the X case was all about. In the case of suicidal ideation, terminate the child's life.
Are you seriously saying, William,
yes,
that there's never a case, for instance, where a woman who's been gang raped, violently gang raped,
yes,
and is distraught at the thought of bringing to full termination the child of her rapist, or one of the rapists, not knowing which one, and that is horrified, traumatized by that prospect, as well as traumatized by the rape itself.
Yes. I'm not in any sense suggesting otherwise.
And are you seriously saying that such a woman ought to be denied the termination of pregnancy in those circumstances?
What I am saying is, if you had...
saying that, I'm
saying that in the case of suicidal ideation, it should not be a ground for abortion. I'm saying that very clearly.
Are you saying that in the case I've postulated?
Not only am I saying that, Vincent, but the psychiatrists who lined up one after the other.
One of them.
You were one of them. And you were in a very,
there were 15 of them, 11 of them agreed.
No, I'm just William, are you seriously saying?
I am saying that suicidal ideation should not be a ground.
Are you seriously saying that in such a circumstance, a woman has been violently gang raped and is distraught, not just by the trauma of the rape, but distraught at the thought of bringing to full termination the child of one of her appalling rapists. And that in those circumstances, is it your view that a woman ought to be subject, that such a woman, if she proceeds with the termination of pregnancy, ought to be imprisoned?
Of course.
I'm sorry, just a minute. William, will you just answer that?
Okay, can I answer the point?
Yes.
Of course not. And can I invite you to stay in the word of reality and the word of truth? Because you tagged on there an imprisonment of the woman. You know, Vincent, and I think you should remind your viewers of this too, that there is no prospect whatsoever of a woman being imprisoned in such circumstances.
How do you know I don't know? What do you say again? I know that. I don't know that. I don't know. But if it's in the law, if it's the law that she may be imprisoned up to 14 years, then it seems to me there is at least a prospect that would happen.
Do you think
Are you happy with that?
Do you think so?
I think there is a prospect.
Do you think there's a prospect that a woman being imprisoned in those circumstances?
Of course.
All I can say is I disagree with your legal assessment there, Vincent. And I think, frankly,
tell me how that is legally mistaken.
Because you know that nobody.
Tell me how is it legally mistaken?
If you give me an opportunity to speak,
yeah.
In the worst case scenario that you mentioned, to hypothesize imprisonment is irresponsible to your viewers.
Okay, how is it legally mistaken?
Irresponsible.
William, how is it legally mistaken?
I'll tell you why. Because no woman actually is prosecuted. The abortionist is prosecuted in very rare circumstances. Yes. That's the way the law operates in practice.
But the law is that the woman can also be prosecuted. Yeah, that's the law. So how is what I've said legally mistaken?
Because you have to stay in the word of reality.
Okay, so it's not legally mistaken, but you think it would never happen.
In the real world, Vincent, if I may, 17 women who were raped last year had abortions. 90 women were raped and were impregnated. Now, first of all, just let me say, the notion that this bill will allow abortion on demand is an outrageous statement for anybody to make. We now have to come back to...
I think William corrected himself in that, to be fair.
Fair enough, but...
Say abortion on request.
Abortion on request, abortion on demand. But the question has not been asked, has not been answered. The people in Ireland are way ahead of the politicians and this debate on this. 83% of people have said that a woman is violently raped. And by the way, when a woman is raped, it's against her human rights to be raped. If it's against her human rights to be raped, surely must it be against her human rights to be forced to have a pregnancy for 9 months, which could possibly destroy our health and most certainly could possibly destroy our life. Secondly, if I may say, 1,500 women. We speak about conscience here and people having to make decisions on their conscience. 1,500 women every year present themselves with fatal fetal abnormalities. They have a horrific decision to make. I have met hundreds of these women. I went out of my way to meet them. Not one of them said that
the law we're talking about won't deal with.
No, but I think this. But the amendments do mention it. There was not one of them who said that their preferred option when they became impregnated to making love was to have an abortion.
Vincent, can I talk about this
But many
issue
of these women, because of the traumatic circumstances that they find themselves in, should have that choice.
Okay.
They should have that choice.
You know, this is really... you know, it's quite incredible to listen to Peadar and to John talk about rape in such a way. I spoke to a woman during this week who was raped, and she had been through that, and she did become pregnant as a result. Yes. She took a year off college, and her little boy is now 6 years old, and she would describe him as
fine.
Her
Should she
reason
not have
for
the
living.
choice?
Just a moment, John. But what you're saying there is that little boy doesn't actually have the right to be born.
I said a woman that's violated should have a choice.
Whether you say it or not.
But don't say something that I didn't say. I didn't say that.
Whether you say it or not, that is the logical.
No, it's not. It's illogical. It's illogical.
It's absolutely the logical conclusion of your argument, because if you're going to say that women are going, that all women, what you said there was that all women.
No, I did not say all women. I did not say all women. I did not say all women.
Can I also say, Vincent, that there may be people watching this programme who are themselves, most likely there are people watching this programme who were themselves conceived through rape. We don't all know how we came to be. So those people don't have... My point is, from the point of view of the child, firstly, it is not acceptable to say that those children do not have a right to life. But secondly, and more importantly, just one second, second,
strange,
Vincent,
yeah.
from the point of view of the woman who has been traumatised from a rape does not need the additional trauma of an abortion, because if you speak to women who've had abortions, I've done, the women in Women Hurt, for example, who will tell you that their lives were destroyed from the abortions they have had. If you look at the international experience, which is something that Peadar is completely ignoring, the international experience shows that there is no proven benefit to a woman's mental health from an abortion. Now, why is the government forcing through a bill in the absence of any evidence to back it up when the psychiatrists have said that they do not support it?
Some psychiatrists.
The majority of psychiatrists, Vincent, in fairness, the majority of psychiatrists.
It's an extraordinary statement
and yet
to
the
make.
government
Why
is
do you say,
listening to the
even if you accept the
minority?
majority, why do you say psychiatrists have said it when you know that isn't true, that some psychiatrists have said the opposite?
Okay, let me say the longer sentence. The majority of psychiatrists. But I think, in fairness, given the way that the government has completely ignored any aspect of the debate, I think the fact that I say psychiatrists and they just don't even address the fact that they brought in psychiatrists to the Oireachtas hearings, two sets of Oireachtas hearings,
Paddy, can I
and
just
ignored the
ask you a
majority
question
of what they
about
said.
this? Isn't there something bizarre about a situation where a woman is entitled to have an abortion, the termination of her pregnancy, the termination of the life of her child, because of something done to her by other people? So,
Isn't what extraordinary?
For instance, you've argued that abortion should be available to women who've been raped.
I've argued that abortion should be available and it should be a woman's choice, and this is where, and John did not in any way imply anyone that chooses to have a child.
I just want to put a counter-argument to you.
No, but I do want to come back on the point about rape. It is very important. Doctors for Choice is for choice, to choose both ways. And in order to choose to have a child, you need to have good childcare. We've had a big scandal about appalling childcare in Ireland recently. You have to have good healthcare, including good reproductive healthcare, access to
good evidence too, Peadar.
Cora.
Good evidence.
Cora,
Yeah, and the evidence, the international evidence, I mean, it was strange that Professor Patricia Casey, when she appealed to the international evidence and to a New Zealand researcher, the same researcher came on national radio and told her that she was wrong and he did not agree with her.
That's incorrect.
Okay, now on the basis of the...
That's completely incorrect.
It's not incorrect that Dr. Ferguson actually believes that on the basis of his research, the availability of abortion should be made more available, not less available. That's what he believes.
I'm sorry, but
there were 15. Sorry, hang on a sec. There were 15. Can we put to bed the notion that the majority of psychiatrists, in some way, agree with your argument? There were 15 psychiatrists gave evidence to the Dáil, the Joint Committee. 11 of them supported that suicidal risk as grounds for access to an abortion was supported by them. Okay, 11 out of 15, because both the president of the IMO and the Medical Council were also psychiatrists, but 9 gave evidence in support.
And over
only 4 gave evidence against. Now that is the vast majority of psychiatrists.
Please don't speak.
The vast majority of psychiatrists gave evidence in favour.
Okay,
yes,
let's reply to that
yeah.
point.
Now, your question...
Over 113 psychiatrists made a submission to the hearings to say that they were very unhappy with the bill because it wasn't evidence-based. Exactly.
There's no evidence of that.
I'm sorry, Peadar.
There are no 113 psychiatrists have given their names. That is just not true.
You may not believe it, but they are there.
When I see their names, I'll believe
it.
When I see their names, I believe it.
I'm sorry, Cora. You said that of the people who gave evidence, the psychiatrists gave evidence to the Oireachtas Committee, you said, first of all, you implied all stated there was no grounds for doing no grounds for abortion for suicidal ideation. Then you agreed that then you said majority. Now Peadar is saying you're wrong.
Okay. Well, the fact of the matter is that the Irish College of Psychiatrists...
You're changing your point now.
No, I'm not changing my point at all.
Yes,
I'm not changing my point at all. What I'm saying is that the Irish College of Psychiatrists brought forward a very select number of submissions to the Oireachtas hearings. What they brought forward, they did an email survey before the hearings, and they surveyed they surveyed all of their members, who numbered over 800, and they got 32 responses, I think was the figure. And on the basis of that, they went in and said that the bill was supported. After that, 113 psychiatrists from the same college said that they are not happy because there's no evidence. You know, this is the fact.
William, I just want to go back to the point that I raised with you originally, and it is the Enda Kenny point, which you said he's disingenuous about, and I think that's unfair. and that what this does is simply legislates for the X case, that abortion is, that now that there's no legislation as of now with respect of abortion except the 1981 Act, or it was 81, yeah, the 1861 Act.
Yeah.
But the situation now is that abortion is legal here in certain circumstances because of the X case. And it's legal here where there is a threat of suicide to the life of the mother, and it's legal here where there's other risks to the life of the mother. That's the legal situation as of now. And what this legislation does is it acknowledges that legal reality and goes on to try to regulate it in a way that makes it more protective of both the mother and the unborn child.
He does say something like that, but it's utterly misleading, and I'll try again, and I'll explain why it is utterly misleading. The Supreme Court, we argue, and many, many people argue, got it hopelessly wrong in the X decision 21 years.
It's irrelevant.
Your point, and Mr. Kenny's point.
Irrelevant.
Yes, but it is utterly irrelevant for the
It is
following
utterly
reason.
irrelevant.
Well, would you give me an opportunity?
That it is the law.
Well,
whether right or wrong, it's the law.
You can keep saying it, but if
Okay,
you listen
go
to
on.
the answer why that point is a silly point, I will explain to you. Right? The Supreme Court made a bad decision. That is the argument. Your point is we must deprecate it, we can wring our hands, but we have to implement it. That essentially is your point.
That's correct.
When a Supreme Court makes a bad decision, the Irish people who are in charge, they are not subject to the Supreme Court,
Yes.
they are in charge. They can fashion the future policy in this area.
And they were asked twice to do so.
Well, okay, let's go through they were asked twice, right? We're getting a little bit too tired to have a referendum. We're going to have a referendum as to that the voting age, as I understand it, is going to be brought down from 18 to 17, right? An interesting issue, a small issue. There's going to be a certain expenditure involved in that. Yet the issue of abortion, which goes to the heart of human rights, because we're talking about, as I say, terminating the life of an innocent human being, that's a fairly important issue. 21 years ago we had a vote on that particular issue. 11 years ago we had a vote on that particular issue, which was decided by less than 1% in terms of the actual vote, and included, as you might remember, some people who were pro-life who voted against that particular referendum. The idea that we're too tired or too poor to have a referendum at this particular stage, and that we must do, as you said, we must obey the Supreme Court. It's not a separate.
People had the opportunity to change the constitutional position as found to be the case with the Supreme Court.
11 years ago. 11 years ago.
And they declined to do so.
But the Irish people have supported the Supreme Court at present, and they've supported legislators.
That is,
because, no, it is 70.
But John, that's such a crude misstatement.
No, hold on.
You know?
You cannot say that 75% of the Irish people are making a crude statement on the basis of what the Supreme Court said, because opinion poll after opinion poll over the last number of months have said they back this legislation. However restricted it is, and 83% and 89% vote have backed fatal fetal abnormality being included.
No.
And sorry, but it's in the Irish Times and the Independent. It's quite clear.
Let's look at something that's a little bit more pertinent for the TDs who are going to be voting on this issue
What did
tomorrow.
you say no to, Cora?
Just
the opinion polls.
in general, the point is the opinion polls do not support this bill, Vincent. They simply don't.
Can I speak on
Cora,
could we come back on the...
Cora wants to...
I want to say
I'd like to pick up William on the Eighth Amendment,
let Cora make
if we could.
This is extremely pertinent to the TDs who haven't made their decision yet on the bill, Vincent. There was a pro-life commitment made. We've seen, and they have seen, how Enda Kenny and the Fine Gael leadership treats the TDs who break a commitment that the leadership themselves chased after before the last election. And I think, you know, if you were a Fine Gael TD at the moment trying to make up your mind on this, quite apart from the fact that there is no evidence that it will throw the medical profession into disarray and leave women and babies in a very dangerous situation, you'd really have to be asking yourself, with friends like the Fine Gael leadership, who needs enemies?
Your point is that prior to the last election, Fine Gael TDs and Enda Kenny himself sought support on the basis of a commitment that they would not legislate for the X case.
That's right.
And now they are going to sanction TDs who abide by the pledge that was given.
That's right.
Is that your point? Yeah.
They are breaking. They are breaking the pro-life amendment, and indeed they are punishing TDs.
That is a valid, in my opinion, a valid criticism of Fine Gael. But what has it got to do with the issues that we're talking about?
It's got a very important issue because this is an issue of conscience, and it's an issue of conscience. Actually, for me, it's not as important an issue of conscience as an issue of evidence, because there's no evidence to back it up, but it is an issue of conscience. And I've seen Alan Shatter in particular talk about this so many times when he himself, back in 1993, talked about the tyranny of the whip and how it should be lifted for something like hair coursing. So what we're looking at a situation in Ireland is that unborn human life and the welfare of women and good medical practice doesn't matter as much to the Fine Gael leadership as hair coursing.
Abortion is good medical practice, by the way.
Two issues you're homing in on here, if you don't mind me saying so, is first of all, you're attacking the views of the vast majority of people who you say are incorrect.
I'm not.
Well, you did say that. And secondly, you are now attacking the legislators who are saying that they're being forced into making a decision.
No, I'm saying that if you make a commitment,
that's kind of offensive to very many Fine Gael Labour TDs who have already committed to backing this legislation.
You know what's offensive to voters, and there was 50,000 of them on the streets in Dublin last weekend, is when you chase a pro-life campaign and you insist and you say, this is our position, we will not legislate for abortion, and a couple of days later you come back
Minister
and
Reilly
you say...
said he would.
A couple of days later...
Before
that
the
is not true. A couple of days later you come back and you say... by the way, it's not up on your website yet, please put it up on your website. And then the next day you say, put it up on your Facebook page, because there's 30,000 people who look at that every day. And then you go ahead and you get individual emails from TDs who add on their little bits that say, by the way, I know what Fine Gael leadership has told you, but if I don't get number ones on Friday, I will not be able to push this position in government. And now we are at a situation the night before the bill gets voted in. It is an absolute disgrace.
Well, I think
pro-life voters will
not
forget it. They are mobilised,
no, but
and it's a
you may be right on that.
Of very savvy people who
there
will
are
not forget this.
No, sorry, there are TDs in Fine Gael and Labour who have stood up to the plate on this, and in Fianna Fáil. Some do, some have.
Terminating the life of a human being. Now that is a matter of great profundity, a very serious moment in Irish history. And I would echo what Cora says. If I were a TD thinking about things now this evening, I would say, I don't believe the Taoiseach when he says this is changing nothing or we have to do it. That's not true. It's changing everything. We don't have to do it. I do not want to be a person who is going to introduce a regime in this country which violates the human right to life. It's too big an issue.
Viewers will be able to decide whether you've been able to explain to them that this legislation changes everything or anything. All right, we're going to take a break. After the break, we'll preview tomorrow morning's newspapers. Join us then.
Paddy.
Hey up, Leash.
You looking forward to the show?
Oh, I am stoked. Singing to a live studio audience, getting made up as a musical icon. I tell you, Leash, it's gonna be a belter.
Paddy, you do realise that you're not performing on the show?
I beg your pardon?
Your Face Sounds Familiar, Saturday at 9 on 3.
Your Face Sounds Familiar is sponsored by Ice Watch.
Let's go to some of the texts and tweets. Somebody says, women do not make the decision to terminate pregnancy lightly. To purport otherwise shows a deep mistrust and hatred of women. Somebody else says, how many on the panel would refuse to avail of this law if their daughter's life was at risk of doctor recommended intervention? Well, I assume the answer is everybody, but that's not an issue in contention as far as I understand. Paul says, well done, Cora Sherlock. You speak for me and for thousands of other Irish women who don't want rights based on ending life. Somebody else says, the Irish people were fooled by Fianna Fáil and we said never again. Fine Gael are going to suffer massively for deceiving the Irish people again. And Mark Murphy says, don't know where this bill gives the idea of abortion on demand. It's hardly do the limited abortion it's meant to. I'm sorry about that. I think the point is that this bill certainly doesn't provide for what's called abortion on demand or even abortion on request.